So according to Kings and Generals playlist, which is the one I'm following, the second part of the 30 Years' War series is called the Danish Intervention. So last time, you know, Bohemia got like destroyed. Well, I don't know how else to put it. They got destroyed by the Imperials, and I was wondering like how does the war continue? But apparently the Danish are gonna jump. And Kings and Generals did mention that the Spanish were in conflict with the Danish. So this tells me that the Danish are gonna just jump into this now, and it's gonna make things even more wild and violent. So yeah, let's get to it, shall we?
It was late 1620. The Bohemians and their allies had been ruthlessly crushed by a Catholic army, Spanish troops were marching on the Palatinate, and the Protestant Union was in disarray. The rebel defeat at the Battle of White Mountain was catastrophic for their cause, but Ferdinand still had problems to deal with. Though Frederick V had been defeated and his military forces smashed, he had not renounced his claim to the Bohemian throne, leaving Ferdinand with the task of eradicating his support without provoking a general European war. Welcome to our second video on the 30 Years' War and the Danish intervention. The sponsor of this video, Raid Shadow Legend. After his army's defeat at White Mountain, Frederick V first fled to Breslau and then to the Netherlands. Even though he had lost militarily, the Palatinate's ruler could still count on Protestant allies. The defending generals Georg Friedrich of Baden and Christian of Brunswick could not coordinate their armies properly, so they were defeated piecemeal by Thiel in the battles of Wimpfen and Hochst in May and June of 1622. Ernst von Mansfeld retreated to the Netherlands, abandoning the Palatinate, which was then gifted to Maximilian of Bavaria, along with its accompanying position as Elector. In 1623, Christian, who wished to invade Bohemia and unify with Bethlen-Gabor, who was once again at war with the Emperor, advanced from the Netherlands with 21,000 men. He was forced into battle by Thiel and crushed at the Battle of Stadtlohn by 30,000 Catholic soldiers. After this battle, the war seemed to be concluded. However, the balance of power had been so disrupted that an external escalation of the conflict was now inevitable. To the north, the Kingdom of Denmark-Norway was still one of the most powerful states in Europe in 1625. The realm was not populous or traditionally wealthy in material, but had total control of the sea lanes connecting the Baltic and North Seas. Danish kings could levy taxes on this shipping, which provided a lucrative and reliable income. In the early 17th century, rulers of Denmark-Norway had several key goals. One was the pursuit of expansionist dynastic aspirations in northern Germany, and the other was the protection of the country and its Baltic hegemony from the rising power of Sweden to their eastern border. To this end, the two Scandinavian states had fought between 1563 and 1570 in the Northern Seven Years' War, and from 1611 to 1613 in the Kalmar War. The ruling dynasty of Denmark-Norway, members of the House of Oldenburg, had North German roots, and its heads considered themselves to be both kings of Denmark and German princes, as they held the Duchy of Holstein within the empire. In 1588, Christian IV ascended to the Danish throne. He used his boundless energy to make Denmark wealthy and powerful. Many of his ventures failed, but he could afford to experiment due to his massive personal fortune, being probably the wealthiest monarch in early 17th century Europe. This ambitious monarch was initially hesitant to become involved in the unfolding German conflict, but the spread of war attracted his concern. To Christian, the actions of Ferdinand II signalled that the Austrian Habsburgs were willing to trample German liberties and increase imperial authority. At the same time, the Dutch, whose truce with Spain had just ended, attempted to enmesh him into the Protestant cause. Christian IV also wished to take Bremen, Verden, and Osnabrück to establish control over the great trading rivers of Elbe and Weser. In 1624, the Dutch, English, and Palatinate invited Sweden's king, Gustavus Adolphus, to help retake the Palatinate. This alarmed Christian, who feared that a large Swedish army supported by the Dutch fleet would turn the Baltic into a Swedish lake. So in January 1625, he offered to intervene. In the Danish system, the king at this time was supposed to be an equal partner with the aristocratic Privy Council, or Riksgrad, and was expected to rule with their consent rather than going above them. The council did not support Christian's invasion, so he had to raise an army for himself.
Okay, so like I said, pardon me for my silence. I don't know anything about this war. I don't know any of the major figures. So, I'm just really trying to absorb as much as I can. But Christian seems like a game changer if he joins on the Protestant sides. Because I said, like, the Imperial Catholics have just completely wrecked the Protestants of the Holy Roman Empire. And so I think the only way they can crawl back up is if, like, I guess Christian jumps in. And obviously there's a lot going on. He doesn't want Sweden getting too powerful. He has his own territorial ambitions. And he's a wealthy dude, and with that wealth, raising his own army should be no problem. Again, like, there's a lot going for him right now, and you could see... I guess the word game changer is what I use to describe his potential intervention.
Vienna, Ferdinand II wanted to lessen his reliance on Maximilian of Bavaria, who led the Catholic League army. Enter Albrecht von Wallenstein. This scion of lower nobility entered Habsburg service during the Long War with the Ottoman Empire, and converted to Catholicism in order to advance his career. Though he was part of the Moravian army since 1615, he defected to the emperor in 1619 and fought at the White Mountain. In the aftermath, Wallenstein assisted in the confiscation of rebel property and land transfers, emerging as a major beneficiary. With this new wealth, he loaned Ferdinand a large sum and was made a duke. Wallenstein was subsequently commissioned by the emperor to raise an army which would be under imperial dominion rather than that of the Catholic League. He did this and eventually raised a force of around 25,000. He informed the Count of Thiel that he would cooperate with him, but would not accept being the Catholic commander's subordinate. This suited Ferdinand perfectly, as the emperor wanted to regain a personal leading role in the war. Okay,
that's interesting. That, you know, the Imperials have been kind of intrinsically linked to the Catholics, the Catholic cause, but it seems interesting that Ferdinand's like, I kind of want to have my own power outside of the general Catholic banner, so now he has his own just imperial army that's just to him, not belonging to the Catholics, so he's still working under the banner of Catholicism with the Catholic League, but with his own army, almost like, I'm an equal, I'm helping you, but I'm not a sort of a part of you, like, you know what I mean. I'm not phrasing it completely eloquently, but yeah, that's an interesting thing. Like, I'm wondering what all the other Catholic leaders think about that. And Christian was kind of a bit worried about Ferdinand wanting to establish imperial just power over the rest of the Holy Roman Empire. I'm wondering if he's correct in that fear. Now Ferdinand just has his own imperial army just for himself, like... And this whole thing started because of Ferdinand's, like, ascension, because they, you know, the Bohemians were afraid of his, like, infamous reputation of stomping out Protestantism and his counter-reformation ideals, as previously stated in the last video, so... Yeah, I'm wondering if any of those fears or concerns are justified, you know?
Began in early 1626, during which Christian concentrated his main army of 20,000 at Wolfenbüttel so that he could keep the two armies of Wallenstein and Thiel divided. The former had occupied the cities of Magdeburg and Halberstadt due to the necessity of feeding and paying the army. It is key to note that in this period, armies employed the savage principle of bellum se ipsum allit, meaning that the armies fed and funded themselves at the expense of the local population in conquered territory.
Oh. So, no supply train or... Okay, so we do know a lot in wars history, they usually had supply trains of some kind for logistics. That's why logistics was such another part of it, was how are we going to supply our men with food, and like, you know, obviously supply lines are a huge thing. So that seems to not exist, at least right here, because they're living off of just the population, I guess, villages. And I like I said in the first part of this series, I do know that entire areas were depopulated and there was a lot of killing in this, and I can see why now, because these soldiers and armies were just running around, probably just looting and killing everyone to just keep funding themselves and to keep themselves, like, I guess, you know, fed at the expense of the peasantry. That makes a lot of sense now. And I'm telling you guys, it sucks to just be a normal person, especially back then. You're just in your little town or your little village, and any day a random army can come up, besiege you, and either kill you, sell you into slavery, etc., loot you. Like, it just sucks to be a normal person. You're just minding your own business, and then just a random army shows up and makes everything a mess. Poor normal people, man.
Population, meaning that armies employed the savage principle of bellum se ipsum allit, meaning that the armies fed and funded themselves at the expense of the local population in conquered territory.
Oh boy, yeah. Yeah, that's basically has war crimes and death and slaughter written all over it, huh?
Moving from his base, Wallenstein initially began operations around Goslar, but turned when he received reports that Mansfeld was advancing south along the Elbe, announcing he was coming to liberate Magdeburg. He advanced towards Dessau, where one of Wallenstein's subordinates guarded the only permanent bridge in the region, a key imperial supply route which had to be protected. On the 24th of April 1626, the Imperial army arrived in the region. After waiting until Mansfeld's attempts to cross the bridge had faltered, Wallenstein counterattacked and routed his enemy at the Battle of Dessau Bridge. Through all this, Christian IV had remained at Wolfenbüttel, attempting to gain additional German support. Meanwhile, the newly recovered Mansfeld rushed east and then south through Silesia, aiming to get to Upper Hungary and rendezvous with Gabor. Not wanting to infringe on Brandenburg's neutrality, Wallenstein initially held off from pursuing the Protestant commander, but after a while he set off with 20,000 men, aiming to catch up with Mansfeld. It is possible that Wallenstein had waited deliberately until Mansfeld had gone too far to turn back. At the same time, Thiel had systematically captured and razed the strongholds at Munden, Northeim and Göttingen, with massacre and plunder occurring throughout the entire campaign. Christian IV raced south in order to attempt a relief, but was too late. Realizing he was now being chased by the Catholic League army, he retreated to the north, attempting to get back to Wolfenbüttel, but was harried by the enemy forces all the way. He chose not to dump the baggage train to increase his army's speed, and because of this was forced to deploy on August 27th when Thiel caught up near Lutter am Barenberger. Both armies numbered around 20,000 and formed up with the Hummiker stream.
Okay, so I guess we'll see what Christians made of and the Danish, and how they'll do against the Catholic forces. So far, the Catholic forces have kind of just been the dominant ones in this war, I feel, and have been winning the most battles. So I guess we'll see, but again, Christian was kind of forced into a battle he didn't want to have right now. So I'm not sure if that's going to affect it and how his generalship is going to do. We'll see what he's capable of, I suppose, but I don't know.
Between them, with the Danish using it as a defensive obstacle. The Danes had a few more cannons than Thiel, but made bad use of them. Only 2 of the 22 guns fired at one time, whereas the Catholic League guns were used much more effectively, shooting bloody holes into the enemy ranks.
Alright, they got the superior artillery use off the bat. Softened up the enemy quite a bit. Alright, let's see.
Softening the Danish force up, the League co-commander Anhalt opened the battle by crossing the stream and advancing with his tercios under artillery cover, eventually managing to gain a foothold on the other side.
Oh boy, and look at this side, coming from this wing, the Catholics left. Cross the river, it's going through the bridge. Are they about to perform a flanking maneuver? The oldest trick in the book to win? And we already know the prowess of the Spanish tercios, which are OP. Oh boy. Yeah, I don't think Christian's gonna win. Look at this. He's already been destroyed. He's already been kind of like depleted before the battle even began. Like, I don't think he's gonna pull off the win here, guys. I'm not really rooting for anybody, though. I feel kind of like I'm just kind of like, usually in series, I kind of just pick a side and I'm kind of like following them. For once, I don't really feel like I'm rooting for anybody. I just kind of like, I'm watching this with like neutral curiosity. I've taken a pact of neutrality for this series. But it is interesting just to see how dominant the Catholics have been.
At the same time, contingents of Imperial Cuirassier, Arquebusier and Dragoon cavalry were dispatched around each wing and crashed into the Danes in a double envelopment.
Oh my goodness.
Thiel's centre now crossed the stream and managed to seize all the Danish artillery, as well as...
They got wrecked. Dude, Christian got wrecked right there. That was one-sided. The double envelopment, like, perfectly executed. The Catholics have been the dominant force so far.
Much of the baggage train. To the southeast, Wallenstein confronted Mansfeld and Gabor on the frontier, but this imperial show of force was enough to make the Ottoman-supported Hungarians seek peace. Seeing there was no hope, Mansfeld tried to escape, but died of disease in the Balkans. Back in Saxony, Thiel's forces now besieged Wolfenbüttel and Nienburg on the Weser. Having made his way back north after his triumph, Wallenstein joined Thiel just north of Lauenburg in September, and together the two overran Holstein and forced the Danes to retreat. As a reward for his service, Wallenstein was made Duke of Mecklenburg, an act which was controversial even to fellow Catholics.
Okay. Wolfenstein? Is that... I keep saying Wallenstein, but... Either way, he seems to be the guy that the Emperor's putting a lot in, right? Like the Emperor Ferdinand is putting a lot of, like, eggs into this basket, and so far he's been successful. But I'm keeping an eye on him, because even the Emperor's kind of like... He seems to be the Emperor's boy, as it were, you know what I mean? So I'm taking note of him. And again, like, the Protestants are getting wrecked. Like, Christian got wrecked, and he's on the run. He's like, I gotta hide. Like, the Catholic/Imperials are owning this war right now.
The new Duke wanted another base for his burgeoning fleet, and was convinced to cast his gaze onto the Hanseatic city of Stralsund, a town famous for defying ducal authority. In early May 1628, one of Wallenstein's subordinates, Hans-Georg von Arnim, was commanded to put Stralsund under siege.
Turn on Share My Trip in the Uber app.
Wallenstein.
In early May 1628, one of Wallenstein's subordinates,
Wallenstein, yes. Replace the W with the V. Okay, I said Wolfenstein. Wallenstein. I'm trying to. I apologize for my mispronunciations. Like I said, I don't know any of these people. I'm like barely learning about them, and I'm really bad with names, especially European names. So, yeah. He seems like he's gonna be a very big figure, though. Wallenstein. I must remember.
Hans-Georg von Arnim was commanded to put Stralsund under siege. Initially, he did not wish to damage imperial prestige by using such force, so he only loosely blockaded the city. Inside the walls, wealthier aristocrats generally favoured compromise, whereas poorer citizens, led by Justinus von Gosen, would rather resist, as they would likely suffer the most under any occupation by Wallenstein's mercenary army. Completely
justified, and they're probably right. With the way things are going, with armies funding themselves, just taking whatever they want, yeah, the lower, poor people are gonna suffer, so perfectly justified that they don't want this, you know?
As the first imperial assaults began, Stralsund had 20,000 inhabitants and was defended by a citizen force of 2,500, a levy of 1,500, and a further 1,000 mercenaries recruited the previous winter. Arnim now demanded the surrender of the city. In order to add more weight to imperial demands, he seized the island of Danholm just off the eastern edge of the harbour, and this managed to put cannons in range of the city. However, Arnim had no fleet and could not resupply his force. The relatively small Stralsund navy managed to blockade the trapped Imperials on the island until it surrendered on the 15th of April, depriving their forces of a few cannons.
Alright, cool counter right there. Naval superiority, very useful.
Over the next month, 6,000 reinforcements arrived at the Imperial siege lines, which prompted Arnim to command a night assault, but this was repelled relatively easily and the attackers retreated. Seeing the initial success of the defenders, Christian IV, who had retreated into Denmark, sent 1,000 Scots and Germans to assist the town under the command of Heinrich Hulk. After a few more small-scale repulsed attacks on the 26th and 27th of May, Arnim resorted to repeated massive artillery bombardments as he waited for Wallenstein to arrive. 600 more reinforcements arrived on June 20th under the Swedish flag. 3 days later, the town concluded a 20-year-long alliance with the King of Sweden, Gustavus Adolphus, who then chose to garrison the town. This was the beginning of Sweden's intervention in the 30 Years' War.
Oh, wow. Okay, so interesting that Swedish and the Danish seem to be against the Imperial/Catholics, even though there's a rivalry between the Swedish and Denmark, Normandy, you know, but they're still working together, I guess. We're gonna try to one-up on each other, like, who's the more useful towards the anti-imperial side, I guess. That's interesting.
The siege intensified on June 27th when Albrecht von Wallenstein arrived in person. He took command of the imperial forces from Arnim and renewed the assaults with a great intensity. In these attacks, the Scottish forces were defending the key eastern district of Franken under the command of Robert Monroe. While they distinguished themselves and managed to repulse the attackers, 500 of the 900 Scots were killed and a further 300 were wounded, including Monroe himself. During the following night, Wallenstein succeeded in taking the outer fortifications of the city, but could not progress any further. Instead, he again resorted to mass bombardments with his heavy guns. On the following morning, the Duke of Pomerania, Bogisław XIV, sent envoys to urge Stralsund to surrender, but they refused. On June 30th, more Swedish vessels arrived and reinforced the defenders with a further 600 soldiers, whilst under heavy fire from the imperial cannons, which were now wary of any ships approaching. The situation began to change on the 17th of July, when Alexander Leslie arrived with 1,100 more Scots. He almost immediately sallied out of the defences and launched an audacious attack on the siege lines, inflicting many losses. The next week was decisive. Inclement weather, in the form of heavy rainfall between the 21st and 24th of July, turned the battlefield into a sea of mud, making the attackers' situation untenable. Finally, on the 4th of August, Wallenstein lifted the siege.
Wow. Big, a good, L against the Catholic side. And again, the naval superiority came in clutch, between stopping the potential threat of Danholm, the Swedish and Danish sending constant manpower unopposed, naval superiority came in clutch this time.
For the first time in the 30 Years' War, Albrecht von Wallenstein had been defeated.
Wow.
Christian IV wished to capitalize on the Protestant success at Stralsund and again began to raise an army on the island of Usedom. On the 11th of August 1628, Christian marched to Wolgast and captured it, meeting no resistance from the imperial garrison. The Danish king was then met with overwhelming support from the local population to turn Wolgast into a fortress like Stralsund. He then awaited Wallenstein for the final battle.
Alright. So, Christian lost his first battle. Then again, he didn't really want to fight that time. He was trying to get away from the Catholics. This time, though, he's turning his newly conquered place in Wolfgast into a fortress, and he wants to fight this time. So we'll see what he can do now that he's prepared and ready for a fight. Though Wallenstein has proven to be kind of the Emperor's guy. He's his boy, so we'll see. So far, Wallenstein has had the more, at least in terms of this series, in battles, the more success of the two. But we'll see if Christian can get the upset.
The Imperial commander had withdrawn from Stralsund after his defeat and headed east to face the new Danish force in the field with 7,000 troops, consisting of 33 infantry companies, 20 cuirassier companies, and 11 cannon. The Danish army had 6,000 soldiers, including 1,500 cavalry and 400 Scots from the Donald Mackay regiment. Wallenstein attacked on the 22nd of August, quickly wiping out the Danish right flank and killing 1,000 Danish troops, capturing another 600.
Ooh.
Nightfall allowed Christian and some of his troops to retreat on their
ships. Christian keeps getting wrecked. But, alright, Christian, Wallenstein, man, he's going for it. And again, he seems to be probably the more prominent figure in terms of, military leadership of the Catholic side, or at least the one who's gotten the most attention so far since his introduction. So, let's see.
Wolgast was badly burned and looted, and the Danish garrison had to surrender. This was the final stage of the Danish intervention on behalf of the Protestant cause, and it seemed as though the Catholic cause was once again ascendant. However, Stralsund showed that the tide was gradually turning. Two events in the next year, 1629, would affect how the war would progress. First, the Peace of Lübeck ended the conflict between Wallenstein and Christian IV, both of whom now needed peace. The agreement was remarkably lenient to the ostensibly humbled Danish king, who was allowed to retain his pre-war position on the condition that he would promise not to militarily intervene on the side of the Protestants again.
Yeah, Christian got absolutely wrecked. He showed up and oh boy. Not good for the Protestants, huh?
Second was the Edict of Restitution, a decree which attempted to retroactively enforce the clause of Augsburg that Catholic lands were no longer to be held by Protestants. This was a bold enough act to cause many moderate Lutherans, who had kept silent up until now, led by the Elector of Saxony.
Oh boy. Okay, so it seems like the Bohemians' concern about Ferdinand was completely right, because he mentioned Ferdinand being like, you know, anti-Reformation, and was kind of infamous for that. And now, this, I mean, he had a lot going for him because a lot of the Protestants kind of became neutral, like especially Saxony, right? And we're kind of like that helped. But this might be he might be chewing off more than he can chew with this. And it seems like now that Saxony, which was, he said in the first part, the strongest Protestant place in the Holy Roman Empire, now has gone back to the gray, which means they might get involved. I think Ferdinand might have made a really big blunder with this move.
Become increasingly threatened. However, they were now on their own again until a new force would appear to once again intensify the 30 Years' War, the Kingdom of Sweden, led by Gustavus Adolphus.
Yeah, Sweden got involved. Sure, Denmark, Norway, kind of surrendered. They basically threw in the towel after Christian got wrecked, but let's not forget Sweden didn't say anything about peace, and they helped in Streisand, so... Okay, a new challenger has arrived for the Catholics, Sweden. And we do know Sweden does become a very powerful force later on, basically being almost a top dog in Europe, as we covered in the Great Northern War. So this is a bit before that, before I guess Sweden becomes the top dog of Europe, so we'll see if this plays a part in their rise.
We'll talk about it in the next video on the 30 Years' War, so make sure you are subscribed.
Okay, I'm hyped. I'm loving this series. I love not knowing anything, because I just love learning, you know, alongside you guys. So, I'll see you guys tomorrow when we start part 3. Bye, everyone.